Hi, in this video I want to talk about authentication and how I added that to my website, Harry Howard's Journals, which is based on my great-grandfather's journals from the 1930s and 40s. So authentication is very important because it allows you to sign in and then save data that is specific to you. For example, on this website, you might find a journal entry that you think is interesting and you might want to save that for later. So authentication allows you to save that and then it'll be related to your profile and then it can be recalled when you sign in. So I use Next-Auth and Google Sign In to do the authentication, and let's check it out. Let's see how it works. So I want to start with this diagram showing a little bit behind the scenes, and Next-Auth simplifies a lot of this for us, so we don't actually have to do all of this, but I wanted to show a little bit of the process that happens behind the scenes. So when you're on your computer and you sign in to my website, for example, using the Google sign-in, you enter your credentials, and then Google recognizes those credentials and then will send information to the server, an access token that the server can use to get user information from Google. So now the server has an access token that it can communicate with Google with, and it's got all the user info that we want to send to the client. But before we send it to the client, we want to first check our database and see if that user already exists. If not, we'll add a new user to the database, and then we'll see if the session exists, and if not, we'll create a new session. And so with that session and user information that we've gotten from the database, then we can send a session token to the client, which is used for communication back and forth, and that's stored as a cookie on the client side. We'll also send some session data that the client has requested, and there's a callback that we'll get to in a second in the Next-Auth options that allows you to tweak what information you want to send to the client at this step. So after that first step, if the client needs more session information, it can send that session token that it's stored as a cookie, and it can receive more information if that token has been validated. So, like I said, Next-Auth kind of simplifies a lot of that for us, so we don't actually have to do all that. The main part, what we have to do is right here, is specify our auth options. And you can see I'm using the Google provider as our only provider right now. I'm using Prisma as middleware to my database, so when the server asks the database about the user and session information, it does that through Prisma. And then we've got some callbacks, like I mentioned. The session callback, you can modify what data is sent to the client after it's retrieved that data from the database. And then the secret is used by the server to validate that the client-side data hasn't been tampered with. So let me show you the Google page, how we set it up on Google. Once you set up your account and go to the Google Cloud section, the OAuth section, you just have to fill in the URLs, and then Google will send you a client ID and a client secret that you can plug into your Google provider options. And then once you've got that set up, you can go into your app component. And by the way, I'm using Next.js, so this is kind of like the main entry point for the app. And we just wrap the app in a session provider component and pass in the session data so that all the children components can use that session data if they want. And let's take a look at an example of that using that session data. So here is the use session hook that comes from Next-Auth, and we retrieve the session data here, and then we just can access the information like the image. So let me show you how that works. Over here on the top right corner of the website is where I've got this login component, and you can see the user image for my Google account is displayed there. So that's pretty easy, considering all the stuff that happens behind the scenes, and I'm glad Next-Auth and Google Sign-In kind of simplify a lot of that for us. So one challenge that I did face though, let's go back to that Next-Auth options. I'm using an empty session callback here because I found that if I don't include this empty callback, then not all the data that I want gets passed to the client, like the user ID specifically doesn't get passed for whatever reason. I guess it's not part of the default information that Next-Auth sends, and I'm guessing that using this session callback prompts the Prisma adapter to send more information, because if we look at our Prisma schema, the user ID is part of the user model, and so this is all these pieces of information get sent when I use that empty session callback. But if I don't use that empty session callback, not all this data gets sent, like the ID specifically. So that is one challenge that I face, is that even though Next-Auth and Google kind of do a lot of things behind the scenes, which is nice, it can be a little bit confusing at times, a little bit opaque. But I was able to get it working in this case, so that's good. And then in the future, I want to add a couple things. So for example, it would be nice to have multiple providers so that maybe someone doesn't have a Google account, or maybe they're having trouble signing in with their Google account. So multiple providers would be nice. Also, I think it would be a good idea to send users an email if maybe if someone responds to their comment. And I can do that because the email address is part of that Google sign-in information. So that's how I implemented authentication with Next-Auth and Google sign-in. Like I said, it was pretty easy because they do a lot of things behind the scenes, but there were also some road bumps um, because yeah, it does so much behind the scenes that sometimes I'm not sure what is going on. But in the end, it worked out well, and I encourage you to check it out and let me know if you have any questions or comments. Thank you.